In the oldest tavern of the capital, where merchants, soldiers, and nobles mingled beneath smoke-stained rafters and candlelight that danced like whispered secrets, Orlena Ironwill moved through the crowd like a ghost wrapped in crimson. Her white hair caught the firelight, turning it to silver flame. Her pale skin seemed almost translucent in the dim glow, as if she were carved from moonstone and draped in blood-red silk. She carried trays of ale and wine, her steps silent, her presence unremarkable to those who looked but did not see. They thought her simple. They thought her forgettable. They were wrong. She heard everything. The drunken boasts of soldiers, the veiled threats of merchants, the bitter complaints of nobles who believed themselves above consequence. And she understood more than they could ever imagine. For Orlena possessed a gift that had slept in her blood for generations, a knowledge that stirred in her dreams and whispered through her waking hours. She understood the ancient language, that forgotten tongue of kings and ritual, of prophecy and power. She had never been taught. She simply knew. And she kept that knowledge locked behind her silence, as one might hide a blade beneath a cloak. Tonight, the tavern hummed with anticipation. Word had spread that the Alpha King himself would grace the establishment with his presence, a rare occurrence that sent the staff into frantic preparation and the patrons into excited whispers. Orlena felt the shift in the air before she saw him enter. It was as if the very atmosphere bowed. Iskarian Stormwatch filled the doorway like a living storm. Tall and powerfully built, his presence commanded attention without effort. His long black hair fell past his shoulders, wild and untamed as a wolf's mane, and his beard framed a face carved from granite and shadow. His eyes were dark as midnight forests, holding depths that spoke of battles fought and enemies vanquished. He wore authority like a second skin, and danger rolled off him in waves. Men stepped aside. Women lowered their eyes. The tavern itself seemed to hold its breath. Beside him walked Jorath, his right hand and most trusted advisor. Where Iskarian was raw power barely contained, Jorath was cunning wrapped in charm. He smiled easily, laughed loudly, and his eyes never stopped calculating. The two men moved to a private table in the corner, away from the masses but still visible, still commanding the room's attention. Orlena was assigned to serve them. She approached with steady steps, her heart calm despite the weight of their gazes. She had served kings and beggars alike. They were all just men in the end, all mortal, all temporary. The evening progressed with wine and conversation. Iskarian spoke little, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the wooden floor. Jorath spoke for both of them, entertaining the king with tales and jests. As the wine flowed, Jorath's amusement grew sharper, more reckless. His eyes landed on Orlena as she refilled their cups, and a cruel light sparked within them. He leaned toward Iskarian, his voice pitched low but not low enough. Orlena's acute hearing caught every word. "My king, I have a challenge for you, a test of your command of the old ways." Iskarian raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued despite his usual stoic demeanor. "What manner of challenge?" Jorath gestured toward Orlena with his cup. "The ancient language. Give an order to the girl in the old tongue. Something befitting her station. Let us see if the words of kings are still remembered, even if they are no longer understood by common ears. A cruel game. A display of superiority wrapped in linguistic prowess." Iskarian considered for a moment, his dark eyes studying Orlena's face. She met his gaze steadily, revealing nothing. He thought her unaware. He thought her incapable of comprehension. He thought wrong. Iskarian's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile, though it held no warmth. He spoke, his voice taking on a formal cadence, words flowing in a language that had not been heard in these halls for centuries. "Kethera nim servath, Dolamira kasthen veleth. You who are beneath notice, bring more wine for your betters." The words were precisely constructed, laced with dismissal, and designed to belittle. But there was an error in the grammatical structure, a subtle misplacement that changed the nuance from formal command to awkward insult. To those who did not understand, it sounded impressive, authoritative. To Orlena, it revealed the king's imperfect mastery of the tongue he wielded like a weapon. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. In the pinned comment, you'll find a special selection of the best Amazon audiobooks that inspire our stories. If you purchase any audiobook through those links, you'll be directly supporting the channel and helping us create more stories. Tell us where you're watching from and how old you are in the comments. I hope you enjoy the story. The tavern continued its noise around them, oblivious. Jorath grinned, waiting for Orlena to stand confused, perhaps frightened by the strange words from the king's mouth. Instead, Orlena stood perfectly still. The moment stretched like pulled silk. Then she set down her tray with deliberate precision. Her pale eyes, which had seemed so unremarkable moments before, suddenly blazed with an inner fire. She straightened her spine, and something ancient and powerful flickered across her features. When she spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering, each syllable pronounced with perfect precision in the same ancient language. Velkethara nim Korath, Iskarian Ethran Stormwatch, Dotha Kastan Velereth Mirnathana Voth Keleth, Servath Nim, Korath Vel Nathara. I who observe all, Iskarion of the Thunder Watch, hear your flawed command and correct your construction. I serve those worthy of proper speech. The effect was immediate and devastating. The ancient language was not merely translated but corrected, improved, and returned with the grace and authority of one born to it. She had not only understood his insult, but had identified his grammatical error, fixed it, and delivered a response that was simultaneously respectful and reproachful. She had spoken his full title in the old form, a title that few even knew existed, and she had done so with the bearing of one who had every right to do so. Silence crashed over their corner of the tavern like a wave. Iskarion's hand froze halfway to his cup. Jorath's grin vanished as if slapped from his face. For a long moment, neither man moved, neither breathed. The Alpha King stared at the young woman in the red dress, as if seeing her for the first time, which in many ways, he was. When Iskarion finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but beneath it ran currents of shock and something else. Something like recognition. You speak the ancient language. It was not a question, but Orlena nodded once. I do. Impossible, Jorath hissed, recovering from his shock with anger. No common girl could know such things. This is trickery, some performance learned by rote. Orlena turned her pale gaze to him, and for an instant, Jorath saw something in her eyes that made him recoil. Power, ancient and undeniable. Shall I recite the 12 verses of the first bonding? Perhaps discuss the grammatical distinctions between the northern and southern dialects? Or would you prefer I translate the inscription on the blade at your king's hip, the one written in script so old even the royal scholars have forgotten its meaning? Iskarion's hand dropped to the pommel of his sword, where indeed ancient script was carved. He had inherited the blade, had worn it into countless battles, but had never known what the symbols meant. He looked at this woman, this waitress in a red dress with hair like winter snow, and felt the ground shift beneath his understanding of the world. Who are you? He demanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. Orlena met his gaze without flinching. I am Orlena Ironwill. That is all I have ever been, and all I know myself to be. But even as she spoke the words, she felt their inadequacy. Because the truth was, she did not fully understand what she was. The knowledge had come to her like dawn breaking, gradual and inevitable, words and dreams, understanding without study, a feeling of connection to something vast and ancient that pulsed just beyond the edge of her awareness. She had learned to hide it, to appear ordinary, because extraordinary people attracted dangerous attention. Tonight, that careful facade had shattered. Iskarion rose from his seat, his full height and presence suddenly overwhelming. The tavern's noise had died completely now. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. The Alpha King approached Orlena slowly, as one might approach something wild and potentially dangerous. When he stood before her, close enough that she could smell leather and pine and something wilder, something of forest and storm, he spoke again in the ancient language. Orlena Ironwill, Velkathara nim Korath, Watara Veleth nim Kasten. Orlena Ironwill, you who observe all, what are you truly? His pronunciation was better this time, more careful. He was learning, adapting. This was a man who made mistakes once and remembered the lesson. Orlena answered in the common tongue, because this answer deserved to be heard by all. I am a woman who hears what others do not, who understands what others have forgotten. Beyond that, I cannot say. I was not raised to this knowledge. It simply is. Iskarion stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face, as if he might find answers written there. Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He inclined his head to her, a gesture of respect from a king to an equal. Come to the castle tomorrow at sunset. We will speak further. It was not a request, but neither was it a command laced with threat. It was an invitation wrapped in inevitability. Orlena understood that her life had just changed irrevocably. She nodded once, accepting. Iskarion turned and left the tavern, Jorath hurrying after him. The noise returned slowly, like water filling a vessel, but now it was all speculation and whispers about the mysterious woman who had spoken the impossible. Orlena finished her shift in a daze, her mind racing. She returned to her small room above a baker's shop and sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the capital. What was she? Why had this gift awakened in her? And what did the Alpha King want? She did not sleep that night. Instead, she listened to the voice that had always whispered in the back of her mind, the one that spoke in fragments of the ancient language. Tonight, it spoke more clearly than ever before. You are seen now. Everything changes. Trust your blood. Trust your knowing. The path ahead is dangerous and necessary. When sunset came the following evening, Orlena dressed in the same red dress, braided her white hair with careful precision, and walked through the capital's streets toward the castle that dominated the skyline. Guards expected her. They led her through halls of stone and tapestry, past chambers where decisions were made and fates decided, until she stood before great oak doors carved with wolves and moons. Inside, Iskarion waited. He had dismissed his attendants, all except Jorath, who stood in the corner with the expression of barely concealed hostility. The Alpha King sat not on his throne but in a chair by the fire, an attempt to make the meeting seem less formal, less intimidating. It did not entirely succeed. The man himself was too imposing for casual ease. Sit, Iskarion said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Orlena sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The king studied her in silence for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been in the tavern, thoughtful. I have spent the day consulting with scholars, with the oldest records in the royal library. The ancient language has not been spoken fluently outside of ritual in nearly 400 years. It is preserved in texts, studied by academics, but not spoken, not known in the way you know it. Orlena nodded. I understand this is unusual. Unusual, Jorath scoffed from his corner. It is impossible. No one learns such a language without instruction, without years of study. She is lying, my king. Or she is dangerous. Iskarion held up a hand, silencing his advisor without looking at him. His eyes remained fixed on Orlena. How? One word. The only question that mattered. How? Orlena took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I have always heard languages differently than others. When I was a child, I would hear merchants speaking in foreign tongues and understand them without knowing how. But the ancient language, it was not like that. It did not come from outside. It came from within. Like a memory of something I never experienced. Like knowledge written in my bones. She paused, then continued. It began with dreams. I would wake with words on my lips. Words that meant things I could not explain in common speech. Then I found a fragment of a text in a market stall, part of an old scroll being sold for kindling. I could read it. Perfectly. As easily as I read the tavern's menu. From there, the knowledge grew. When I heard you speak last night, I understood not just the words, but the intent, the structure, the history behind each syllable. Iskarion leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his intensity focused entirely on her. The scholars believe the ancient language was the tongue of the first ones, the original pacts that formed the foundations of our people. They say it was a language that carried power in its very structure, that those who spoke it truly could command not just with authority, but with truth that could not be denied or twisted. Yes, Orlena whispered, feeling that truth resonate in her chest. The words have weight. They have power. To speak falsely in the ancient language is nearly impossible. The tongue rejects deception. Jorath moved from his corner, his face flushed with anger, or perhaps fear. This is nonsense. Ancient superstition. My king, you cannot seriously believe. I believe what I heard. Iskarion cut him off, his voice hard as iron. I spoke words of dismissal to test a theory, to amuse myself with a cruel jest, and she responded with correction and dignity. That is not memorized performance. That is mastery. He turned back to Orlena. Which brings me to my question. Why were you working in a tavern? Why hide such an ability? Orlena smiled sadly. Because I learned early that being different is dangerous. When I was younger, I made the mistake of correcting a merchant who was cheating customers using false translations. He accused me of witchcraft. I barely escaped. I learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to serve and listen and reveal nothing. Understanding flickered across Iskarion's face, and something else, something that looked almost like regret. I humiliated you last night. I used an ancient and sacred tongue to belittle someone I thought beneath me. You had every right to remain silent, to let me wallow in my ignorance and cruelty. Why did you respond? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Orlena considered it carefully. Why had she revealed herself? She had spent years hiding, protecting herself. What had changed? Because, she said slowly, I was tired of pretending. And because the words you spoke deserved better than to be used for mockery. The ancient language is sacred. Even if I do not fully understand why I know it should be respected. For the first time since she had entered, Iskarion smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of his lips beneath his dark beard, but it transformed his face. For an instant, the fearsome Alpha King disappeared, and she saw something gentler, something almost human. You shamed a king to defend the dignity of a dead language. You are either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both, Orlena admitted. Jorath cleared his throat loudly. This is all very fascinating, but what do you intend to do, my king? Surely you cannot allow someone with such unusual abilities to simply walk free. If she can speak the ancient language, who knows what else she might be capable of? What threat she might pose? Iskarion's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold consideration. For a moment, Orlena's heart raced. Was she a prisoner now? Had she revealed herself only to be locked away? But then the king shook his head. No. I intend to do something far more dangerous. I intend to trust her. Jorath's face paled. My king. Enough, Jorath. I have made my decision. Iskarion stood, and Orlena rose with him. He circled her slowly, studying her as a general might study a battlefield. Orlena Ironwill, I am making you an offer. Remain at the castle as my consultant on matters of the ancient language. There are texts in the royal library that no one has been able to fully translate. There are rituals we perform by rote, without understanding. You could help us reclaim knowledge that has been lost. Orlena's mind spun. This was more than she had imagined, more than she had feared or hoped. And if I refuse? Iskarion stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Then you are free to go. I will not compel you. But I think you are as curious about your abilities as I am. I think you want to understand what you are, and why this gift has awakened in you. The castle library holds records that go back to the first bonding. If answers exist, they are here. He was right. The questions had haunted her for years. Why her? Why now? What did it mean? The possibility of answers was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I accept, she said. Iskarion nodded once, satisfied. Good. Jorath, arrange for chambers to be prepared in the East Wing. Orlena will need access to the library and to me. Any scholar or guard who questions her presence answers to me directly. Jorath's jaw tightened, but he bowed. As you command, my king. His voice dripped with barely suppressed resentment. As arrangements were made, Orlena found herself wondering what she had just agreed to. The castle was a place of power and intrigue, of politics and danger. She was walking into a world she did not understand, armed only with a gift she could not explain. But as she glanced at Iskarion, at the intensity in his dark eyes and the careful attention he paid to every word she spoke, she felt something stir in her chest. Not fear. Something else. Something that felt like recognition. The first weeks in the castle were overwhelming. Orlena was given chambers that were larger than the entire room she had rented above the baker's shop. She had servants, though she insisted on caring for herself. She had access to the vast library, a room that stretched 3 stories high and contained thousands of volumes, scrolls, and fragments. And she had regular meetings with Iskarion, sessions where they would sit together and work through ancient texts, his formal education meeting her instinctive understanding in a collaboration that yielded stunning results. They discovered incantations that had been mispronounced for generations. They corrected historical records that had been mistranslated, changing the understanding of key events in the Pack's history. They found prophecies that had been dismissed as nonsense, because no one could read them properly. And slowly, carefully, they began to find references to something called the Luna Gift. It was Orlena who first stumbled across the term, in a fragment so old that the parchment crumbled at the edges. She brought it to Iskarion late one evening, finding him in his private study, a room lined with maps and weapons and books he read for pleasure rather than duty. I found something, she said without preamble. They had moved past formality in these sessions. When it was just the two of them, he was not the king, and she was not the consultant. They were simply 2 people trying to solve a mystery. Iskarion looked up from the battle reports he had been reviewing, his face weary. He had been dealing with border disputes all day, and exhaustion lined his features. But when he saw her expression, he set aside the reports immediately. Show me. Orlena laid the fragment on his desk carefully. Together they bent over it, their heads nearly touching as they studied the ancient script. She began to translate, her finger tracing the words. In the first times, when the Packs were young and the bonds were pure, certain women were born with the Luna Gift. They could hear the ancient language not as learned speech but as inherent truth. They could understand the bonds that tied pack to pack, wolf to wolf. They could sense danger and deception. They were the bridges between the Alpha's strength and the Pack's heart. Her voice trailed off. Iskarion lifted his head to look at her, his dark eyes intense. You think this is what you are. Luna gifted. I do not know what I am, Orlena admitted, but the description matches. I hear the ancient language as if it were my native tongue. And lately, I have begun to sense other things. Emotions in the castle. Tensions. Lies. Iskarion straightened, his expression unreadable. What lies? Orlena hesitated. This was dangerous territory. But she had come this far. Small ones mostly. Courtiers saying one thing and meaning another. But there are patterns. Symbols I have seen repeated in places they should not be. Conversations that stop when I approach. I think someone in the castle is working against you. She expected disbelief, perhaps anger. Instead, Iskarion sighed heavily and moved to pour himself a drink from the decanter on the sideboard. I have suspected as much. There have been information leaks, plans that should have been secret somehow reaching our enemies, but I have not been able to identify the source. He took a drink, then looked at her over the rim of the glass. Can you? The question was simple, but the weight behind it was enormous. He was asking her to spy, to use her abilities to root out a traitor. It went far beyond translating old texts. It was entering the dangerous world of court politics, where a wrong accusation could mean death. I can try, Orlena said quietly. Over the following days, Orlena moved through the castle with new purpose. The task was more difficult than she had anticipated, not because the evidence was hidden, but because uncovering it meant accepting a terrible truth. She listened to conversations in the ancient language that courtiers spoke in ritual, unaware that she understood every nuance, every shade of meaning. She watched for the symbols she had glimpsed before, strange marks that seemed to be a code, etched in places where only someone looking would find them. Behind portraits, beneath furniture, in the margins of documents. And she felt the currents of emotion around her, the way her strange gift had begun to manifest in new ways that both thrilled and terrified her. The Luna gift was growing stronger with each passing day. She could sense deception, like a foul taste in the air, bitter and wrong. She could feel loyalty like warm sunlight on skin, comforting and true. And she could detect betrayal like a cold blade against her skin, sharp and undeniable. It was exhausting, overwhelming, to feel so much from so many people. The castle was full of small deceits, petty ambitions, hidden resentments. But beneath it all, there was one source of wrongness that pulsed like an infected wound, constant and growing more dangerous. She began to document everything she found. A conversation overheard in the library between Jorath and a visiting merchant, conducted in the ancient language. They spoke of shipments and timing, but Orlena recognized the coded nature of their words. Shipments meant troop movements. Timing meant battle plans. She found messages in Jorath's study, written in symbols that combined ancient script with a cipher she had to work for 3 days to break. When she finally deciphered them, the content made her blood run cold. Names of soldiers loyal to Iskarion, marked for elimination. Routes that should have been secret, detailed with precision. Weaknesses in the castle defenses, catalogued and ready to be exploited. The trail led, impossibly and horrifyingly, to Jorath. Every piece of evidence pointed to him. Every thread of betrayal wound back to the man Iskarion called brother. Orlena spent sleepless nights hoping she was wrong, reviewing her findings again and again, searching for any other explanation. But the ancient language did not lie, and her gift did not mislead. The truth was inescapable and devastating. During these days of investigation, something else was happening, something Orlena had not expected and could not control. Her relationship with Iskarion was deepening in ways that went beyond their work together. It began with small moments. The way he would look up from a document and smile when she entered a room, as if her presence alone brought him joy. The way he remembered that she preferred honey in her tea, and always ensured it was prepared correctly. The way his hand would linger on hers when they exchanged books, his touch warm and steady. They spent hours together, not just working but talking, really talking in ways that went beyond politics and prophecy. He told her about his childhood, about the weight of being born to rule, about the loneliness of having power, but rarely having connection. She told him about her years of hiding, about the fear of being discovered, about the strange dreams that had haunted her before she understood what she was. They shared fears and hopes, doubts and dreams, and with each conversation, the space between them seemed to shrink. One evening, they were in his private study, poring over a particularly difficult text about the original Lunabonds. Orlena was sitting on the floor, surrounded by books, her white hair falling forward as she concentrated. Iskarion watched her from his chair, and when she looked up to ask him a question, she found him staring at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "about how empty this room was before you came, how empty everything was. I had my kingdom, my duty, my battles, but I did not have this." He gestured between them. "This ease, this connection. You make me want to be better, Orlena. Not a stronger king, though you do that too, but a better man." Orlena's heart thundered in her chest. "Iskarion?" "I know the timing is wrong," he continued, standing and moving toward her. "I know you are working on something that troubles you, though you have not told me what. I know there are complications and dangers, but I need you to know this. I need you to know that you have become essential to me, not just to my rule, but to my heart." He knelt beside her on the floor, taking her hand in both of his. His dark eyes were intense, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "I am falling in love with you, Orlena Ironwill. Perhaps I have been since the moment you put me in my place in that tavern. And I needed to tell you, even if you cannot return the feeling, even if duty or circumstance makes it impossible. You deserve to know that you are seen, truly seen, and treasured." Tears pricked Orlena's eyes. How could she tell him that she had fallen just as hard, just as fast? How could she admit that every moment with him felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed? How could she explain that the thought of causing him pain with what she had discovered about Jorath was breaking her heart? "I see you too," she whispered. "The man beneath the crown, the one who carries so much weight alone, the one who tries so hard to be strong for everyone else. And I am falling in love with that man, Iskarion, with his strength and his gentleness, with his fierce loyalty and his capacity for growth, with everything you are and everything you are becoming." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "Then we face whatever comes together. Promise me that. Whatever burden you are carrying, whatever trouble you have found, we face it together." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and when he kissed her this time, it was different from that first desperate kiss after she had told him about the investigation. This was slower, deeper, a promise sealed with lips and breath and the sharing of souls. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other among the scattered books and ancient words, two people finding refuge in each other against the storms they knew were coming. But the respite could not last. The evidence was complete. The betrayal was undeniable. And Orlena knew she could delay no longer. She did not want to believe it. Despite his clear dislike of her, Jorath was Iskarion's closest friend and most trusted advisor. They had fought battles together, had ruled together. The king loved him like a brother. Accusing Jorath would shatter something in Iskarion, and Orlena found that the thought of causing him pain made her own chest ache in unexpected ways. But the evidence was undeniable. She found messages written in code using ancient symbols, hidden in Jorath's quarters. She heard him speaking in hushed tones to a merchant known to have ties to a rival pack. She sensed the oily wrongness of his emotions whenever Iskarian spoke of military plans or political strategies. Jorath was betraying the king, and he had been doing so for months, perhaps years. Orlena sat in her chambers as night fell, the weight of knowledge crushing her. She had to tell Iskarian, but how? How did you tell someone that their brother had betrayed them? How did you break a heart while trying to save a kingdom? She found him that night in his private chambers, a privilege she had been granted as their work together had deepened. He was alone, standing by the window and looking out over the city, a figure of solitude and power. "Iskarian," she said softly. He turned, and his face softened when he saw her. Over the weeks, she had noticed this change in him. When they were alone, the harsh mask of the Alpha King fell away. He smiled more easily. He spoke more freely. He was gentle in ways the world never saw, and she had begun to treasure these private moments more than she cared to admit. "Orlena, I did not expect you tonight. I thought you would be reading." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I could use the company." But she remained standing, her hands clasped before her. "I have something to tell you. Something you will not want to hear." His expression sharpened immediately, the king returning. "Tell me." So she did. She laid out everything she had discovered, every piece of evidence, every pattern. She showed him the messages she had found, translated the codes. She explained how the ancient language had helped her sense the deception, how the Luna gift had guided her, and she watched as understanding and devastation warred across his face. When she finished, silence filled the room like lead. Iskarian stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, broken. "Jorath." "I am sorry," Orlena whispered. "I am so sorry." "How long?" he asked. "How long has he been betraying me?" "I believe at least a year, possibly longer." Iskarian moved suddenly, violently, sweeping his arm across the table and sending maps and documents flying. "He was my brother in all but blood. He saved my life in the Northern Campaign. He helped me take the throne. He was the one person I thought I could trust without question." Orlena took a step closer, drawn by his pain. I know this hurts, but he is working with your enemies. If we do not act, more lives will be lost. More information will be leaked. The kingdom itself could fall." Iskarian turned to her, and in his eyes she saw such raw anguish that it stole her breath. "And if you are wrong? If I move against him based on your word alone and you are mistaken, I will have destroyed a friendship and my own reputation. I will have shown the kingdom that I place trust in a stranger over my oldest friend." "I am not wrong," Orlena said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I wish I were. I wish I could tell you something different. But the ancient language does not lie, and my gift does not mislead. Jorath is a traitor." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the distance of the room. Then Iskarian closed that distance in 3 long strides and stood before her. He raised his hand, and for an instant she thought he might strike her in his anger and grief. Instead, he cupped her face gently, his calloused thumb brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart stutter. "You have given me truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. You have offered me loyalty I do not deserve when I tried to humiliate you the first night we met." "Why?" Orlena's breath caught. They were so close. She could feel the heat of him, smell the scent that was uniquely his. "Because you are a good king who deserves better than betrayal. Because the kingdom needs you. And because I believe in you, even when you do not believe in yourself." Something shifted in his eyes. Some decision made, or barrier crossed. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, and then deeper, more urgent, as if he were seeking comfort from the pain of betrayal in the warmth of her acceptance. Orlena kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palms. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing hard. Iskarion rested his forehead against hers. "I trust you, Orlena Ironwill. I do not fully understand why, but I do. If you say Jorath is a traitor, then we will prove it and stop him." Relief and something deeper, something that felt dangerously like love, flooded through Orlena. "Thank you." They spent the night planning, not as king and consultant, but as partners. They would set a trap. Iskarion would announce in Jorath's presence alone a false military plan, complete with details about troop movements and supply routes. If Jorath was truly a traitor, he would pass that information along, and they would be waiting. 3 days later, the trap was sprung. Iskarion gathered his war council and announced a campaign against the Eastern Territories, speaking in detail about numbers and timing. Jorath listened carefully, asked questions, made suggestions. To anyone watching, he was the perfect advisor, loyal and strategic. But that night, Orlena and Iskarion followed him. Using her sensitivity to emotion and his knowledge of the castle's hidden passages, they tracked Jorath to a meeting with a cloaked figure in the old guard tower. From the shadows, they listened as Jorath passed along every detail of the false campaign, selling his king's trust for gold and promises of power in the new order after Iskarion fell. When the exchange was complete and the cloaked figure vanished into the night, Iskarion stepped from the shadows. Jorath turned, and the color drained from his face. "My king, I can explain." "Explain what?" Iskarion's voice was cold as winter wind, hard as stone. This was not the gentle man who had kissed Orlena. This was the Alpha King, terrible in his wrath. "Explain how you have been betraying me for over a year. How you have sold our battle plans to our enemies. How you have caused the deaths of our warriors with your treachery." Jorath's face twisted, desperation and anger warring. "You do not understand. They promised me power, position. You have everything, Iskarion. You were born to be king. What was I? Always second, always in your shadow. They offered me a chance to rule, to be more than your loyal dog. You were my brother," Iskarion said, and his voice cracked on the word. "I would have given you anything you asked. Instead, you chose betrayal." Jorath's eyes found Orlena, who stood beside Iskarion. Hatred blazed there. "This is her doing. That witch has poisoned you against me. She wants to take my place at your side. Can you not see it?" "What I see," Iskarion said quietly, "is that she showed me truth I did not want to face. What I see is that you are a traitor and a liar, and what I see is that you will now face justice." Guards emerged from other shadows. Jorath tried to run, but he was surrounded. As they dragged him away, he screamed threats and curses, his voice echoing through the castle. Orlena stood beside Iskarion, watching until the sounds faded. Then the king's shoulders sagged, and the weight of grief settled over him like a cloak. "Come," Orlena said softly, taking his hand. "You should not be alone tonight." He allowed her to lead him back to his chambers, this powerful man suddenly seeming lost and weary. In his private rooms, away from the eyes of the castle, Iskarion finally broke. He sank into a chair and put his face in his hands, and Orlena went to him without hesitation. She knelt before him and took his hands in hers, drawing them away from his face so she could see him. "You did what was necessary," she said. "You protected your kingdom." "I destroyed my friend," he replied, his voice rough with unshed tears. "He was wrong. He was a traitor. But he was still the man who fought beside me, who laughed with me. Part of me died with his betrayal. Orlena reached up and cupped his face as he had cupped hers days before. Then let that part rest, and let what remains become stronger. You are not alone, Iskarion. Not anymore. He looked at her, this fierce king with a warrior's hands and a wounded heart, and something profound passed between them. He pulled her up and into his arms, holding her as if she were an anchor in a storm. And Orlena held him back, offering him the comfort and strength she had discovered within herself. That night, they became more than king and consultant. They became what the ancient texts had spoken of, Alpha and Luna, two halves of a bond that transcended position and politics. The days that followed were difficult in ways that went beyond politics and punishment. Jorath was tried before the full council, the evidence of his betrayal laid bare for all to see. Orlena had to present what she had found, standing before the assembled nobles and warriors, translating the coded messages, explaining how the ancient language had revealed what was hidden. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with barely concealed suspicion, as if her gift itself was somehow tainted by association with the betrayal it had uncovered. She bore their scrutiny with dignity, knowing that she was doing what was necessary, but feeling the weight of it nonetheless. Jorth's defense was desperate and bitter. He accused Orlena of manipulation, of using witchcraft to poison Iskarion's mind against him. He called her an outsider, a threat, someone who had appeared from nowhere and destroyed a brotherhood that had lasted years. Some in the council nodded, swayed by his words or by their own discomfort with the changes Orlena represented. But the evidence was too solid, too comprehensive. The messages in his own hand, the testimony of the merchant he had been dealing with, captured and questioned. The symbols matched to documents that had ended up in enemy hands. There could be no mercy, no second chances. He was stripped of his titles, his honors, his place in the pack hierarchy. The ceremony was brutal to witness. Each title taken was like a blow. Each honor rescinded a death. Jorath's face went from anger to desperation to a terrible emptiness. When it was done, when he stood before them as nothing more than a traitor awaiting judgment, he looked at Iskarion one last time. "I was your brother," he said, his voice breaking. "Before her, I was your brother." Iskarion's face was stone, but Orlena felt the pain radiating from him through their growing bond. "You stopped being my brother when you chose betrayal over loyalty, when you chose gold over honor. Do not blame her for revealing what you chose to become." Jorath was led away to the dungeons beneath the castle, there to await a final judgment that Iskarion could not yet bring himself to pronounce. Execution was the standard punishment for such treason. But Iskarion could not order the death of the man who had once saved his life, not yet. So Jorath remained in the darkness below, a festering wound that would not heal until the king found the courage to close it completely. In the aftermath, Orlena expected to feel relief or vindication. Instead, she felt only weariness and sorrow. She had done what was necessary, but the cost had been high. She saw it in Iskarion's eyes, the way something bright had dimmed. She felt it in the castle itself, a sense of trust broken that would take time to rebuild. And she wondered, in her darker moments, if she had truly saved the kingdom, or simply traded one kind of wound for another. But Iskarion would not let her withdraw into guilt. In the private hours they shared, away from the council and the court, he held her and reminded her that she had saved lives with her actions, that more betrayal would have come if she had remained silent. He reminded her that truth, however painful, was always better than comfortable lies. And he reminded her that she was not alone in bearing the burden of difficult choices. "You gave me truth when I needed it most," he told her one night, as they lay together in his chambers, her head on his chest, his fingers running through her white hair. "You showed me that trust must be earned through action, not assumed through history. That hurt, Orlena. It hurt more than any wound I have taken in battle. but it was necessary pain, the kind that comes from cutting away infection so healing can begin. "I hated causing you pain," she whispered. "I still hate it." "I know. And that is one of the reasons I love you. Your compassion. Even when delivering hard truths. Your strength, even when it costs you. Your courage, even when you are afraid." He tilted her chin up so he could look into her pale eyes. "You are everything I never knew I needed. Everything I never thought to want. And I will spend the rest of my days being worthy of the trust you placed in me when you chose to reveal who you truly are." Their love became a source of strength for them both as the kingdom slowly adjusted to the new reality. And as that love deepened, as their bond grew stronger, something else began to manifest. The Luna gift was evolving. Word had spread through the castle about Orlena, about her gift and her role in exposing the traitor. Some viewed her with suspicion, but others began to see her differently. When she walked the halls, people bowed. When she spoke, they listened. And when she stood beside Iskarion in council meetings, translating ancient laws or offering insight gleaned from old texts, her presence was no longer questioned. The Luna gift continued to manifest in new and unexpected ways. Orlena found she could sense the health and unity of the pack, the thousands of souls who looked to Iskarion for leadership. She could feel their fears and their hopes, their loyalty and their doubts. And when she spoke to them, even in common tongue, something in her voice resonated with power that went beyond words. They called it the Luna's voice, and it calmed disputes, inspired courage, and bound the pack more tightly to their king. As autumn turned to winter, the council began to murmur about succession, about the need for an heir. Iskarion was a king without a queen, and that was a vulnerability the kingdom could not afford. There were suggestions, proposed matches with noble daughters from allied packs, political unions that would strengthen borders and alliances. Each suggestion felt like a knife to Orlena's heart, though she tried to hide it. She had no right to claim him, not officially. Their love was real, but not recognized by law or custom. She was his consultant, his confidant, perhaps even his lover in private. But she was not his queen, and the council made it clear they did not believe she should be. Iskarion refused them all with a curtness that bordered on rudeness. He would hear no talk of other matches, no discussion of political marriages. When pressed, he would simply say that he had made his choice and would announce it in his own time. But privately, he worried. He wanted Orlena as his queen, wanted it with a certainty that surprised him with its intensity. But he knew the obstacles. She had no family name, no noble lineage, no political advantage to offer. He was asking the kingdom to accept a queen who had been, until months ago, a tavern waitress. It would be seen as weakness, as sentiment overruling duty. It could destabilize everything he had worked to build. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside the castle windows, he found Orlena in the library. She sat surrounded by books as she often did, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the chill that even the great fires could not fully banish. But she was not reading. She simply sat, staring at nothing, her face drawn with a sadness that made his chest ache. She looked up as he entered and tried to smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "You should be at the council dinner," she said softly. "I should be many places," he replied, crossing the room to her. "But I chose to be here, with you, always with you." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his much larger one. Her fingers were cold, and he chafed them gently, trying to warm them. "The council wants me to marry." Orlena's heart clenched painfully, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "That is wise. A king needs a queen. The kingdom needs stability. The people need to see that you are building a future, not just maintaining a present." "Then you agree I should marry?" His dark eyes watched her carefully, reading every micro-expression. She forced herself to nod, though the thought of him with another woman made her chest ache with a pain that was almost physical. She imagined some noble daughter with the right lineage and the proper training, someone who would stand beside him at ceremonies and bear his children and never truly know him the way Orlena did. The image was unbearable, but she would bear it. She would smile and serve and watch the man she loved belong to another, because she loved him enough to want what was best for him and his kingdom, even if it destroyed her. If that is what is best for the kingdom, then yes. Iskarion smiled, and there was mischief in it, a lightness she rarely saw, a playfulness that transformed his usually serious face. Good, because I intend to marry you. For a moment, Orlena's mind simply went blank, unable to process the words. Then they hit her with the force of a physical blow. What? He laughed at her expression, the sound rich and warm. Marry me, Orlena Ironwill. Be my Luna. Be my queen. Be my partner in all things, public and private, political and personal. I know the council will object. I know there will be those who say you are not of noble birth, that you have no family name worth mentioning, that this is a mistake born of infatuation or manipulation. But I do not care. I have never cared less about anything. You are the strongest, wisest, most courageous woman I have ever known. You have saved my kingdom and healed my heart. You have shown me truth when I needed it and loved me despite my flaws. There is no one else I would have at my side. There is no one else I could imagine sharing my life with. There is only you, has only ever been you since you stood in that tavern and put me in my place with words I tried to use to humiliate you. Tears pricked Orlena's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. Iskarion, I am no one. I was a tavern waitress. I have no idea who my parents were or what bloodline I carry. I cannot tell you my family history, or my noble lineage because I have none. How can I be queen? How can I stand beside you when I bring nothing to the union but myself? He stood, bringing her with him, and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. You bring everything. You bring wisdom and courage. You bring the Luna gift, which is more valuable than all the noble blood in the kingdom. You bring your heart, which is fierce and kind in equal measure. You bring yourself, and that is more than enough. More than I deserve, though I will spend my life trying to become worthy of you. Orlena looked up at this man who had entered her life with cruelty and transformed into the person she loved most in the world. The council will never accept it. They barely tolerate my presence now. As your queen, I would face opposition at every turn. They will see me as an outsider, an interloper who seduced you away from your duty. Then let them object. I am the Alpha King, and I choose you. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. They will learn to accept it, or they will learn that their king can rule without their blessing if necessary. His voice was fierce, protective, the voice of a man who would fight the world for what he loved. You are mine, Orlena Ironwill, if you will have me. Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love until the stars fall from the sky and beyond. Say yes. Please. Say yes. Before she could respond, before she could fully process the enormity of what he was offering, he kissed her. It was deep and claiming, a kiss that spoke of possession and partnership, of desire and devotion. It was a kiss that promised forever, that sealed a bond already written in their souls. When they finally broke apart, Orlena was breathless and laughing through her tears, joy bubbling up in a way she had never experienced before. Is that a yes? He murmured against her lips, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, she whispered back, her hands cupping his bearded face, her thumbs tracing his cheekbones. Yes, you impossible, wonderful, infuriating man. Yes to everything. Yes to being your Luna, your queen, your partner, yes to facing whatever comes together, yes to loving you for as long as we both shall live and beyond, yes." The announcement caused an uproar, exactly as Orlena had predicted. The council erupted in objections. Noble families who had hoped to place their daughters as queen were furious. There were accusations, demands, threats barely veiled as concerns. But Iskarion stood firm, and beside him, so did Orlena. When the council called for proof of her worthiness, Orlena stood before them and spoke in the ancient language. She recited the verses of unity, words that had not been heard in 400 years, words that bound pack to purpose. Her voice rang through the throne room, and as she spoke, something extraordinary happened. Every person present felt it, a stirring in their blood, a recognition of truth. The pack bond, usually felt only faintly, surged to life. They felt connected to each other, to their king, to this woman who spoke with the voice of the ancients. When silence fell, the most senior counselor, a man who had served 3 kings, slowly knelt. The Luna has spoken. The blood recognizes what politics would deny. She is worthy. One by one the others knelt, until Orlena stood before a room full of bowed heads. Iskarion descended from his throne and took her hand, bringing her to stand beside him. "Behold your Luna," he proclaimed, "she who hears the ancient voice, she who carries the gift of our first people, she who will stand beside me as we lead this kingdom into a new era." The coronation took place during the winter solstice, in a ceremony that blended the old ways with the new. Orlena wore white, the color of her hair and of new beginnings, threaded through with red like the dress she had worn the night they met. Ancient words were spoken. Oaths were taken. And when the crown was placed upon her head, a circlet of silver wolves running beneath a full moon, the pack bond surged again, stronger than before. Orlena Ironwill, once a nameless waitress, became Orlena Stormwatch, Luna Queen. That night, alone in the royal chambers that were now theirs together, Iskarion pulled her close. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" "For seeing the man beneath the king. For answering when I tried to humiliate you. For being brave enough to reveal yourself. For saving me from my own blindness. For everything." Orlena tilted her head back to look at him. "You saved me too. You gave me purpose. You gave me a place to belong. You gave me love." They made love that night with the gentleness of new marriage and the passion of long-suppressed desire. Iskarion, who was fierce and commanding to the world, was tender and worshipful with her. He touched her as if she were precious, as if she might shatter, even as she showed him her own strength, her own desire. They were equals in this, in all things. Alpha and Luna joined as the ancient bond intended. Winter became spring, and spring became summer. The kingdom flourished under their joined rule. Iskarion remained the warrior king, strong and decisive, but Orlena's influence tempered his harsher edges. She advocated for the vulnerable, translated laws that had been misunderstood for generations, and mediated disputes with wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. The people loved her, and more importantly, they trusted her. On a warm summer evening, Orlena stood in the garden, her hand resting on her abdomen where new life grew. She had not yet told Iskarion, wanting to be certain, but the Luna gift whispered confirmation. A child, an heir, a future. She felt him before she heard him, the bond between them allowing each to sense the other's presence. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back against his solid chest. "You are smiling," he observed. "What secret makes you glow so?" Orlena turned in his arms and took his hand, placing it where hers had rested. "This secret, this gift, we are going to have a child." For a moment, Iskarion stood frozen, his dark eyes wide with shock. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming him into something incandescent with joy. He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead against her abdomen, his hands gentle on her waist. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." Orlena ran her fingers through his long black hair, this fierce king kneeling before her in perfect vulnerability. "We made this together. This child will be born of both our strengths. They will be blessed by the ancient blood and the Luna gift." Iskarion looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "I love you, Orlena Stormwatch. I loved you from the moment you corrected my grammar and put me in my place. I loved you when you showed me truth that hurt. I loved you when you stood beside me against the council, and I will love you until the last star falls from the sky. And I love you," she replied, cupping his face in her hands. "My king, my mate, my heart." The child was born on the first night of winter, as snow fell softly over the kingdom. The labor was long and difficult, and Iskarion refused to leave her side despite the midwife's objections. He held her hand, whispered encouragement, shared her pain through their bond. And when the baby's first cry pierced the air, when the midwife placed the tiny, perfect child in Orlena's arms, they both wept. A boy, dark-haired like his father, with his mother's pale skin and eyes that already held depth beyond his hours. As Orlena held him, she felt the Luna gift stir and settle around the child like a blessing. He would be strong, she knew. He would be wise. He would carry the legacy of both old blood and new purpose. "What shall we name him?" Iskarion asked, his finger gently touching their son's tiny hand, marveling as miniature fingers curled around his. Orlena looked at her husband, at the man who had begun as her tormentor and become her everything. "Kieran," she said. "It means little dark one in the old tongue. Kieran Stormwatch, heir to the Alpha King and the Luna Queen." Iskarion kissed her forehead, then the baby's. Perfect. Like his mother. As the castle celebrated the birth of the heir, Orlena sat in the royal chambers, nursing her son and watching the snow fall. She thought back to that night in the tavern, when a king had tried to humiliate a waitress using words he thought she would not understand. She thought of all the paths that had led from that moment to this one, all the pain and revelation, betrayal and trust, loneliness and love. The ancient language had given her power, but love had given her purpose. The Luna gift had shown her the truth of others, but Iskarion had shown her the truth of herself. She was no longer the woman who hid in shadows, who pretended to be ordinary to survive. She was a queen, a Luna, a mother. She was seen and known and cherished. Iskarion entered the room quietly, having stepped away to give orders about the celebrations. He came to sit beside her on the bed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and gazing down at their sleeping son. "I never knew I could be this happy," he admitted. "I thought happiness was victory in battle, or a kingdom at peace. But this, having you, having him, this is joy I never imagined possible. We have come far from that night in the tavern," Orlena said softly. He winced. "I will spend the rest of my life making up for that cruelty." "You already have," she assured him. "You chose truth over comfort. You chose trust over suspicion. You chose love over duty. You are a good king, Iskarion. But more importantly, you are a good man." He pulled her closer, careful of the baby between them. "And you are the Luna the prophecies spoke of, the one who would restore the ancient bonds and bring the pack into a new era. Though I suspect the prophecies never mentioned you would do it by correcting the king's grammar." Orlena laughed softly, the sound like bells in the quiet room. Perhaps that was the point. Power does not always announce itself with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it whispers in ancient words. Sometimes it waits tables in a tavern. Sometimes it simply chooses to reveal itself when the moment is right. And I am grateful you chose that moment, Iskarion said. Grateful you were brave enough to show me who you truly were. Grateful you gave me a chance to become who I was meant to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep, feeling the weight of the future and the peace of the present. Outside, the kingdom celebrated. Inside, a family rested, bound by love and destiny, and the ancient words that had brought them together. In the dungeons far below, Jorath sat in darkness, forgotten by most, remembered by few. His betrayal had failed. The kingdom had strengthened. And the woman he had scorned as insignificant had become the most powerful Luna in generations. It was a bitter ending for one who had reached for power through treachery, while those who had sought truth and love had found both in abundance. Years would pass. Kirin would grow strong and wise, trained by his father in the ways of war, and by his mother in the ancient knowledge. More children would follow, each carrying the gift in different measure. The kingdom would face challenges, as kingdoms always do, but it would face them united under the dual rule of Alpha and Luna, strength and wisdom joined. But that night, the night of Kirin's birth, all of that was yet to come. That night, there was only a family, new and precious and complete. There was only love, hard-won and deeply cherished, and there were only two people who had found each other across the barriers of station and expectation, who had chosen each other despite every reason not to, and who had built something beautiful from a beginning that had promised only shame. Iskarion looked at Orlena, at the serene beauty of her face in the candlelight, at the gentle way she held their son. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The life you left behind? The anonymity? The safety of being unremarkable?" Orlena met his gaze, her pale eyes luminous with emotion. "Never. That life was survival. This life is living. I would not trade a single moment of this, not even the difficult ones, for the false safety of invisibility. Even that first night, when I tried to humiliate you? Especially that night," she said with a smile, "because that was the night I stopped hiding. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I met you, truly met you. Not as a king to be feared, but as a man who needed to be challenged. How could I regret the beginning of everything?" Iskarion leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet. A kiss that held promise and gratitude and bone-deep love. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, their son cradled between them. "The ancient language brought us together," he murmured. "Your gift revealed the truth, but love, our choice to love despite everything, that is what will sustain us." "Yes," Orlena agreed. "Love is the truest language of all. It needs no translation. It recognizes no barriers. It simply is, as inevitable as the tide and as powerful as the moon that pulls it." They stayed like that as the candles burned low, as the celebrations outside faded to peaceful silence, as the world turned toward morning. A king and his Luna, an alpha and his mate, a family born from impossible circumstances and unlikely love. And in the ancient words that whispered through the castle stones, in the pack bond that hummed with contentment, in the very air itself, there was recognition of something profound. This was how it was meant to be. This was the fulfillment of old prophecies and new possibilities. Orlena Ironwill, who had been invisible, had become undeniable. Iskarion Stormwatch, who had been alone at the top, had found his equal and his home. And together, they had created not just an heir, but a legacy. They had proven that the greatest power was not in domination, but in partnership, not in cruelty, but in kindness, not in hiding, but in revealing, not in speaking, but in truly hearing. The Alpha King, who had tried to belittle a waitress in the ancient language, had learned the hardest and most important lesson of his life. True strength was not in never making mistakes, but in having the courage to acknowledge them. True power was not in instilling fear, but in inspiring loyalty. And true love was not in perfect beginnings, but in choosing each other every day, through every challenge, for the rest of their lives. As dawn broke over the kingdom, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose, Orlena whispered the ancient words of blessing over her sleeping son. Words of protection and wisdom, of strength and compassion, of love that would guide him through whatever life brought. And Iskarion added his own blessing, in the common tongue, but no less powerful, speaking of honor and duty, courage and kindness. And above all, the importance of truly seeing those around you, of hearing what is said beneath the words. Their story had begun with words meant to wound, and had transformed into a tale of healing. It had started with a test meant to amuse, and had become a testament to unexpected grace. It had opened with a king who thought himself superior, and had revealed a man learning humility, and a woman who had seemed ordinary discovering she was extraordinary. And now, as their son stirred in his mother's arms and opened his eyes to look at his parents with infant solemnity, the story continued. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a conclusion, but a promise. The promise that love could transform, that truth could heal, that destiny could be chosen rather than merely accepted. In a tavern somewhere in the capital, a new waitress served drinks to merchants and soldiers. She would never know that one of her own, one who had once stood where she stood, now wore a crown and commanded respect from the highest to the lowest. She would never know that the path from invisible to invaluable was possible, that courage could change everything, that speaking truth in whatever language you possessed could alter the course of kingdoms. But perhaps that was as it should be. Every person's story was their own to discover, their own to write. Orlena had written hers in ancient words and modern choices. Iskarion had written his in lessons learned and love embraced. And together, they were writing a new chapter for their kingdom, one that honored the past while creating the future. The Luna gift had awakened in Orlena, not by chance, but by necessity. The kingdom had needed what she could offer, and she had needed the opportunity to become fully herself. The ancient language had been the key that unlocked both their destinies, but their choices had been what made those destinies matter. They had chosen to trust when suspicion would have been easier. They had chosen to love when distance would have been safer. They had chosen each other when the world offered them countless reasons to choose differently. And in that choosing, in that daily recommitment to each other and to the ideals they held dear, they had become more than king and queen, more than Alpha and Luna. They had become partners in the truest sense, united not by ceremony or political necessity, but by recognition of kindred spirits, by respect hard-earned and freely given, by love that had survived its difficult birth and emerged stronger for it. As the kingdom woke to news of the heir's arrival, as celebrations renewed and joy spread through the streets, the new family rested in their chambers, wrapped in the peace of new beginnings and the comfort of chosen love. Outside, the world continued its turning. Inside, 3 hearts beat in harmony, bound by blood and choice, by ancient gifts and modern miracles, by the power of words spoken truly, and the greater power of love lived honestly. This was their story, from insult to intimacy, from cruelty to compassion, from loneliness to love. And though the ancient language had brought them together, it was the language of the heart, requiring no translation and recognizing no boundaries, that would keep them together. For all the days of their lives and beyond, into whatever future their son and his siblings would build, their love would be the foundation, their trust the cornerstone, their partnership the model. The Alpha King had learned to listen, the Luna Queen had learned to speak. Together, They had learned that true power came not from standing above others, but from standing beside the right person. And in that standing together, in that perfect balance of strength and wisdom, fierceness and compassion, they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy not of conquest, but of connection. A kingdom not of fear, but of love. A future not of one voice commanding, but of many voices heard, understood, and valued. And it all began with a king who spoke ancient words he did not fully understand, and a woman who understood them perfectly, who chose to answer, and in answering, changed everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.